Turning now to the Middle East, the Trump administration unveiled the deal of the century a few weeks ago. While some countries have embraced the plan, the Palestinians rejected it outright. Palestinian Authority President Abbas slammed the proposal at a gathering of the UN Security Council 2 weeks ago, calling the proposed borders of the state Swiss cheese. Joining us now is President Trump's former special envoy for Middle East peace, Jason Greenblatt. Jason, thanks for being with us this morning. Now, you were one of the architects who spent about 3 years drafting this deal with Jared Kushner. In what ways do you think that this specific plan can succeed?
Well, this plan is a real opportunity for the Palestinian people. I also want to point out that President Abbas and the Palestinian leadership slammed it before it even came out. They were just not interested in seeing our plan. I don't know that they were interested in seeing any plan. But I hope they take the time to read it. I hope the Palestinian people take the time to read it, because it is an in-depth analysis of how we can get past this conflict. Instead of lofty, aspirational 1 or 2 sentence ideas, we've really laid down everything clearly so that everyone could sit at their kitchen table, husbands and wives with their children, and ask themselves, are the compromises necessary to achieve peace? And I hope the answer is yes.
What are your thoughts on that? Because if you're putting together this plan, you must assume at some point, hey, the Palestinians, Mahmoud Abbas, not going to be on board with this. How do you cater that when you're coming up with a plan? How do you cater that knowing they already oppose it even before it's written?
Well, we spent 2017 studying the conflict. We spoke to the Israeli leadership, the Palestinian leadership. That's another sort of false rumor out there that the Palestinian leadership was not involved. We heard from them many times in 2017. But what we also realized, and what I think is different about our plan, is it's a realistic plan. It's an implementable plan. We could spend the next decades just speaking about these principal talking points that the Palestinians use. They're never going to get that deal. This is a deal that Israel is willing to accept, as evidenced by the Prime Minister accepting it and his opposition, Benny Gantz. And it's something that can be delivered, and it's something that could give the Palestinians the ability to create something exactly like Israel, where they could thrive and prosper. Israel's a tiny country. Against all odds, they've developed something over the last 7 decades that's remarkable. If the Palestinian leadership takes this seriously, they could do the same thing.
At the same time, we've seen, President Trump forming a very strong alliance with Benjamin Netanyahu, who's, like you had mentioned, is up for re-election, and he's got opposition as well. What would happen if Netanyahu does not win?
Well, we hope we know soon, right? I hope they don't go to a 4th election, but I guess, thank God, they live in a democracy. I think this plan works for Israel despite its compromises under any leadership. I think not only did the Prime Minister recognize that, and he called it the opportunity of a century, but I think Benny Gantz recognizes that as well. And I do hope the Palestinian leadership recognizes that too.
Absolutely, yeah. So what about Gantz? If he does, in fact, come into play here, does that change how this peace plan plays out?
I don't think it should, but ultimately it's really up to the two sides. So whoever the Prime Minister is or the Israeli government, they're going to have to read it and decide for themselves if there are changes that they want to make or there are changes they're willing to make if the Palestinians do come to the table and ask for changes. Ultimately, what I think part of the misunderstanding of this conflict is that no one can make peace except the two sides themselves. Not the United States, not the United Nations, not the European Union. So while President Abbas runs around the world trying to gain support to force a peace deal, we can't force a peace deal. So whether it's Benny Gantz or Prime Minister Netanyahu, they will be the leaders who work with President Abbas or whoever might succeed President Abbas and try to achieve peace. But they have to do it together.
Of course, you need 2 people to essentially make peace. But could you kind of let people know what's going on there day to day for people living in that area, in Israel, in Palestine, in the West Bank? Tell us about the violence that we're seeing there and tension between the two, Palestine and Israel.
Well, thanks for asking that, because there's not enough attention paid to it. Over the last 48 hours, they've probably had north of 80 rockets coming from Gaza attacking Israel in the south. Israel's doing its best to manage the situation and fighting back. Nobody speaks about the violence. They speak about the plan. They speak about what they call the deal of the century, but nobody's focused on the fact that unless and until the Palestinian leadership stops the violence, not only the rockets in Gaza, not only the terror tunnels, the balloons that have bombs attached to them, but also the Palestinian Authority's heinous pay-to-slay policy, where they reward Palestinians for attacking and murdering Israelis. Without those things being fixed, without them recognizing that the Jewish state is there to stay, there's no chance of peace. We can't even get to a negotiation of what the border should be if they continue to attack Israel. And that's a very important point, and I hope people focus on that as well.
Jason, when you look back on your time as special envoy for the Middle East, you've done a lot. What are you most proud of?
Well, I'm certainly proud of the president's actions. I'm proud of him finally recognizing the 1995 law to recognize Jerusalem as the capital and move the embassy, the recognition of the Golan Heights, the deepening of the U.S.-Israel relationship. But I'm also proud and hopeful that Israel is now connected to the Arab countries in the region like never before. When I first started, there was a lot of sort of whispering about those connections, and over 3 years we've seen some dramatic changes. Just this week we had a bike tour in the UAE where Israel was represented. Prime Minister met the late Sultan of Oman. The Israeli national anthem being sung in the United Arab Emirates. I mean, these are real dramatic changes, and I think they're going to continue to be more dramatic changes. That's not to the detriment of the Palestinians, but the more that Israel and the region connect, the more we have a chance of peace.
What do you think it would mean if, say, November happens and, a Democrat would potentially win the White House, Trump's out? What would that mean for the peace deal?
Well, I believe President Trump will be reelected, but under your theory, I think if they reject our peace plan and start over, they're not going to get anything done. They'll just go back to the same methods that were tried before, which were well-meaning and well-intentioned, but got nowhere. And I think if they go back to those talking points, they're going to find a reluctant Israel and a reluctant Palestinians. So I hope that they take our plan and build on it rather than reject it.
That is Jason Greenblatt, President Trump's former special envoy for Middle East peace. We thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.